Now, the introduction of edibles raises interesting questions about cannabis and interstate commerce. One question I've been thinking about through this journey of watching the United States cannabis market become legal is their impact on interstate commerce. So we know at the federal level in the United States, cannabis is a Schedule 1 controlled substance. It's illegal to produce, cultivate, and sell cannabis at the federally speaking. Now, this also means cannabis cannot be transported across state lines. They're federal crimes. These are federal crimes under the Controlled Substances Act. But because of a little thing called the Dormant Commerce Clause, states can implement their own intrastate, that is, in state cannabis markets that operate only inside a single state. Scholars and legal writers argue that this setup is possible under the Dormant Commerce Clause, where states can have legal markets while producing cannabis is federally illegal at the same time, because under the Dormant Commerce Clause, states may regulate local aspects of interstate commerce so long as they do not unduly burden or discriminate against interstate commerce. But the Dormant Commerce Clause only applies if the federal government has not acted. So, those scholarly papers that argue that this is possible under the Dormant Commerce Clause, I kind of disagree because the federal government has acted. They've implemented the Controlled Substances Act. So, arguing that interstate commerce between states should happen because of the Dormant Commerce Clause, in my opinion, is unlikely to hold weight in court. I think they have a better argument under the 10th Amendment. But states' rights, that whole argument. But in my opinion, we will have to wait until federal legalization to see the actual importation and exportation between state lines of actual products. And rest assured, guys, there are groups every day. There's senators, congressional members, nonprofit organizations, governors working every day to get cannabis federally legalized. There are some interesting developments on the West Coast. There's a group of states doing a pact between each other to ship cannabis between the states. I might tackle this issue in a later episode, but those two states, it's mainly Oregon, but their partner that they're trying to work with is the state of California. So essentially what's going on here is that Oregon, being ahead of the curve as usual, and I don't know if you saw they legalized psilocybin on election night, but last year in 2019, Oregon passed a bill that essentially would allow the importation and exportation of cannabis products, but it doesn't mean anything until another state signs on. No other state has approved rules for exportation or importation. But as I said, California would be the ideal partner here, but there's been no movement on their end in regard to this partnership. Another interesting development we had last year was two Oregon Democrats, Representative Earl Blumenauer and Senator Ron Wyden. They introduced the State Cannabis Commerce Act, which is a federal bill that would allow importation and exportation amongst legal states that have legal markets. But the bill actually had, it had some hype across the cannabis mainstream media, but it has stalled in the House in a House subcommittee, and I definitely will report back on developments relating to these two issues. But again, back to the states and their own cannabis markets. This because states are allowed essentially to create their own cannabis markets because first of the 10th Amendment, states' rights, the Cole Memo, which essentially says is an informal agreement that the federal government will not use federal funds to prosecute cannabis operators who are abiding by state law. Now, the trick here is that these states or the companies that operate in the states, they cannot participate in interstate commerce between the states. They cannot create cannabis products in one state and ship it or do transaction between state lines. So the question becomes, how are these companies, how are these Florida MMTCs, how is Curaleaf, Trulieve, Fluent, how are they doing partnerships with other companies across state lines if it's federally illegal if it's federally illegal? Well, the main problem federal prohibition places is essentially this. So, for example, a Colorado cannabis edible manufacturer cannot create edible products in Colorado and then ship their products to California. Rather, what this hypothetical Colorado cannabis company has to do is that they have to set up a partnership with a manufacturer in California to produce their edibles in California. Now, putting your business owner hat on, this makes operations for you so much more expensive. I mean, now they're going to have to find a partnership with a manufacturer in California. They're going to have to teach them how to make their gummies and ensure it's the same exact high quality gummy they produce in Colorado. I mean, wouldn't you rather just continue with your manufacturing operations in Colorado and then just simply put your edible products in a cardboard box and ship them to California? Now, because of interstate commerce, or excuse me, because of the federal prohibition on interstate commerce, it requires you as your Colorado operator to go and set up a new shop in California. Now, this example brings light to how far behind the barriers and how, or essentially, it just shows how far behind the cannabis industry is to every other industry in the United States. The barriers the companies in this industry face is crazy. It shows how young the market really is. I mean, can you think of another industry where a business cannot ship their product across state lines and make sales, especially in the digital age of e-commerce? So, for example, applying this law to our partnerships in Florida. So, let's take the partnership with AltMed and Wana Brands. AltMed Florida, they have an agreement to produce Wana brand edibles in Florida and distribute in Florida. So, Wana Brands, what they do, they're not located in Florida, but they probably set up their standard operating procedures with AltMed. AltMed follow those procedures in their kitchens in Florida. Now, in a perfect world where cannabis is legal on the federal level, all Wana brands would have to do, because they're based out of Colorado, would simply ship their edible products to AltMed in Florida. Thus, they would be able to bypass all of the extra legwork that needs to be done to set up operations in Florida. But no, that's not how it works. So essentially what they're doing is they're setting up a partnership and they're going to make AltMed produce the edible products. Partnerships between the MMTCs and edible companies, it's a workaround businesses are using to expand their operations in this super regulated market and provide a more diverse array of products into their states. Edibles is a perfect example of a product that shows the workarounds companies can do to get around the federal prohibition. Now, let's take a moment to imagine a world where it is federally legal. It would twist our current setup, our current valuations of these companies. It would twist it up tenfold. If all of a sudden we went federally legal, let's say under the Biden administration, we go federally legal, states who do not allow cannabis in their state, they cannot prohibit companies from selling cannabis in their states. So states wouldn't be able to block or limit out-of-state companies from entering their state and selling cannabis. Of course, there would be regulations like state licensing issues, but we also have to consider what would happen to these intrastate licenses. Remember, if you get a license in one state, it's only allows you to do operations in that state. So in our current situation, we know states have their own licensing structures. States issue their own licenses. If you have a Florida license, you could only operate in Florida. So what happens to the value of these licenses that have sold for $40-60 million? I think the value would be shown in being a first mover. I think being a first mover, the value of that will truly be shown if we go federally legal. The market will tell us. It will always tell us in the end. We'll truly see how important being a first mover in the industry is once we're legalized on the federal level. I think federal legalization would be more efficient, but it would cause massive disruption to our industry as we see it today. We could see big companies come in and acquire the multi-state operators like we've seen with Constellation Brands and Canopy Growth a few years ago. Not that Canopy Growth is a US MSO, just that we see big companies, billion-dollar companies like Constellation, make investments into the biggest cannabis company in the world at one point, Canopy Growth. And we could see opportunities for smaller businesses to really get their foothold in the industry. We'll see what happens under the next administration, but it's definitely an interesting development.